I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Warren. I'm so excited to have a fellow Canadian on the show today.
I'm delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
So I have been doing some stalking on all of the social medias of you. And I have to say, I absolutely love your website. There's so much great information there. But in one of it, you had a video about your story. And I really want you to tell us about your journey because it was so interesting and you really had me hooked. So let's hook the listeners. Tell us a little bit about your
putting
your
on the
story.
spot. I'll try it.
Yeah.
So my story is unusual because it's weird to have a professional story that starts at birth. But in my case, it's kind of relevant, I guess. When I was born, I was supposed to die. They gave me 0% chance of survival. That's what they told my parents. They didn't tell me. I was just a baby, but and I had a congenital defect, and it turned out I was the second person in history to live through that. And when I learned about that, it kind of stirred something in me. I was like, well, I've been given this gift that I wasn't supposed to have. So what am I going to do with it now? And so that launched me on this kind of circuitous path to try to find the place in which I could make a difference. So I did lots of crazy things. Like I'm a recovering lawyer. I practiced down on Bay Street, which is the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street, for 6.5 years. And I actually thought maybe I'd go into politics at that time. But then when I was in law school, I was classmates with somebody who was a chief of staff for a prime minister who became somebody else who became a cabinet minister, somebody else who was the chief of staff for another cabinet minister. And I just sort of felt, nah, that's not really the game I want to play. And so I went into law thinking, pursuit of justice and all of that. And then I found I liked building a pie rather than fighting over a pie. So I left that to do entrepreneurship. But in the course of that, my first deal on that, I lost out on. I had sort of my idea taken from me and was scrambling around what to do next. And so I became a college professor. I wound up selling a course to a college because I was like, I left my career. I don't have a new thing. My business venture that I just launched didn't work. What do I do now? I'm going to go be a professor.
Those who can't teach, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But while doing that, I built a consulting practice, and then that turned into I partnered with somebody, we merged with another couple of guys, and then we built this really cool new media consulting business, and we wound up creating the Canadian National New Media Awards in Canada. I helped create the first National New Media Association, and so that was super fun. And in the course of all of that, I thought, well, what about art? I had always had this sort of artistic inclination. So I became an actor and a theater director at the same time, thinking, the transformative power of art would have a contribution to the world.
Yes, you'll move people and yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I sort of realized, people weren't leaving my plays changing their lives. And so it was really entrepreneurship that made it sing for me. I've come to the conclusion that entrepreneurship is really one of the most powerful forces for positive social change. I believe that entrepreneurs, the culture in which we live, you just think of the restaurants you eat at, the plays you go see, the clothes you wear, the music you listen to, all of that is driven by entrepreneurs. And there's a great line in the play Rent, one of my favorite plays. And it says, the opposite of war is not peace, it is creation. And what do entrepreneurs do? They create jobs, they create wealth, they create opportunities, they, create jobs, they create lifestyles for people. And therefore, I kind of came to the conclusion that what entrepreneurs do matters. And if it matters, then it matters that they do it well. And so that consulting business, we got hit by the bust we were very strategic in that business. We decided not to work for .com companies. We worked for big brands like RBC and Harlequin Enterprises and McGraw-Hill and companies like that. But what we didn't because we sort of foresaw the dot bus coming, that, a lot of the
Right.
stuff is vaporware. But what we didn't foresee was that even the big brands would freeze all their budgets. And so we had about $500,000 in pipeline business dry up in a couple of weeks. But we managed through that, and I was managing cash flow on a daily basis, which is one of the skills I teach now. And then, so we got through all of that. And then I sold my interest in the business to one of the partners and was looking for the next thing to do. And I thought I really want to help other entrepreneurs do it well. And a family friend was doing this thing called business coaching, which in 2002, I had never heard of. And I wound up researching it, and I thought, this is one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. And so I dived into it, and I've been doing it ever since. And I started with a franchised organization, and I became the top Canadian coach with the world's largest business coaching organization, and then left that to kind of focus on what I coined this term a few years ago, philanthropreneur, which is somebody who wants to make a lot of money while making the world a better place. And so that's sort of the evolution.
Yeah. And I think that's, I love that phrase, because I think there's a lot of times that people get into business because that's what they want to do, right? They want to make a difference. They want to make an impact. And then, they get into the business, and all of a sudden that initiative, I guess, of changing the world gets sort of convoluted and sort of pressed down by the everyday dodgery of business and sort of what happens. So tell us a little bit about what what you view that term as being, and why you really go for people that are trying to be ethical in their business. Like what is it that you're looking for in that?
Yes, that's a great question. So when I use the term philanthropreneur, I distinguish it from an entrepreneur who's a philanthropist, because they're different things, right? A lot of philanthropists, they make money, sometimes not always in the nicest ways, and then they just give money away, and it's kind of like greenwashing or something.
Right.
Whereas a philanthropreneur, or somebody, the term I use now is someone who wants to build a business that matters. And a business that matters is one that inherently in some way has a positive impact on society, while providing the business owner a good living. Like, I don't think there's this weird view that I hear sometimes that, well, if you're doing good in the world, you shouldn't be making a bunch of money,
Right.
Which I find just mind-boggling, because in a capitalist society, it's supposed to be a value for value exchange. So if you are providing someone a product and service while also providing some good to the community or to your staff or to your customers, then you are in fact providing more value. And so you should be receiving more value. So I actually believe that the more good you do in the world, the more successful you will become.
And that shouldn't be a bad thing. And I love that you say that, because that hits so close with me, because I think it's so true, right? Like, it shouldn't be a bad thing to make money.
No, and it should be, as I said, why are we okay with the person who has slimy business practices making $1 million, and then the person who's actually solving hunger or something making $1 million? We go, well, that's not pure.
That's wrong.
Yeah, like, that just doesn't make sense to me, because it's, you're delivering more value.
You can't be good and rich.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I think people lose it, which a lot alluded to earlier, is that I think entrepreneurs, there's a mythology about the entrepreneurial personality too. People think entrepreneurs are risk takers, and they're actually not. They're optimists. And so they start a business not actually understanding how risky it is, because they're so in love with their idea, they just can't imagine that it's not going to work, right? And then they get into it, and all of a sudden, holy crap, this is hard. And so then there's this struggle for survival, and that sort of commitment to those values starts to bump up against the need to make payroll, and people start to, make little compromises. And that's part of why I do what I do. You're in Alberta. I grew up in Edmonton during the heyday of the Edmonton Oilers, when Gretzky and those guys were there. And I always said, Gretzky never cheat. Stephen Curry in basketball never cheats. And it's one of the great lessons, right? When you are excellent, you never have to be tempted to compromise your values. And so what I try to do as a business coach is help, like, if you have the business skills to succeed without compromising your values, then you're more likely to do that. It's when people don't know what they're doing in business, that's when they get that kind of dissonance and that tension between, well, how do I make payroll and do this at the same time? And, they start to make the little compromises that wind up becoming bigger ones down the line. But if you are excellent at what you do, like if you know how to do strategy, if you know how to do financial management, and marketing and sales and team building, then it's going to be easier.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times too, you had, I can't remember which video it was on. That's what happens when you stalk too hard. But you had said, there was one quote that you had said that, I wrote it down because it really meant a lot to me. And I think a lot of people lose sight of this, as you said, your business will grow the more that you do. And I think people get stuck in, running the business and then forget that growth component of themselves as well as the business.
Well, there's an old personal development saying related to that, you don't succeed for what you get, you succeed for what you become. And I think that's a really important exercise, right? Is that for you to become the owner of a $10 million business, you have to be the owner of a $10 million business. What does that person do? What do they think? How do they behave? How do they treat people? And so the exercise of becoming more successful is actually an exercise in personal growth.
So if people are sitting there and they're going, okay, yeah, that, I want that. I want to be the owner of a $10 million company. What are some of the things that you could say, okay, here's something that you need to be paying attention to, or even to be thinking about to get to that point?
So there's a meta level of that and kind of a lower level.
Yeah, of course.
So the meta level, there's like three, I call them the three big mistakes. And most of the other mistakes people talk about are subsets of these, right? Okay. So the three big mistakes are first one is just lack of education. Business is ultimately an intellectual sport. Like there are disciplines and there are skills associated with it. And if you want to be excellent in business, you have to be excellent at the skills. So sales, financial management, marketing, recruiting, team building, customers, this isn't just stuff that you make up, right? There are people who have studied this and deployed this and written about this. And so you've got to educate yourself on the key skills. Like if you want to golf, you got to know which club to use and how to swing it. It's kind of the same thing, right? The second key mistake is that even when people develop the skills, sometimes they get into whack-a-mole, right? They're trying to do too many things at the same time and nothing ever gets done. And so the mistake is not actually doing strategic planning, like saying and when I use that term strategic planning, sometimes people think that's a big, overwhelming, complex thing. It's just saying, what is my focus going to be in this time period? And what are the 3 or 4 things that I need to complete in this time period? And if you do that, like if you do 2 significant things a quarter, you'll have done 8 over the course of a year. You find me 5 businesses that have done 8 significant improvements over the course of a year successfully. There's not that many. And it's because people don't have that kind of focus. And then the third is really accountability, right? Like it's great to learn a bunch of stuff. It's great to build a plan. But if you don't actually execute on the plan and hold yourself accountable to the results, then it's going to fall down. So I call those the 3 killer mistakes, like not educating yourself, not doing planning, and not actually holding yourself accountable. Within that, then there's, okay, what are the actual specific skill sets that you need? And they vary by kind of stage of evolution of the business.
Right. And I think that there's so much stuff that, people will learn. You see I see it tons of times, even just, with my own clients, is they'll go, no, but I go to all of these workshops, and I'm like, but what are you doing after that? Like, what are you doing with all of the education that you're gaining? Because just gaining the knowledge, but not using it kind of makes you an encyclopedia.
Well, I had a client a while ago, and it was the only time I've ever given this advice, but I said, stop reading.
Right. Because that's the other side of the coin. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that is the other side of the coin that people get stuck in.
Oh, yeah. Like he read a new book every week, but he would never apply anything. I had another client who he was a great learner and he did apply things. But what he would do is he would read a book, put this new system into his business, and then 6 months later, read about a new system and then change the system again. And his team their minds were getting blown, and it didn't have enough commitment to have the long-term consequences. And the systems, the funny thing was, the systems weren't actually that different. They were largely vocabulary and window dressing.
Right.
but it meant start, because the fundamentals of business are largely the same.
Right.
You know, and so you can, like, I love people to continually educate themselves, but education without application is just trivia.
Right. Yeah, I love that statement. I think it's true. And I think that people need to, even sit down while they're, after they're done listening to this episode and go, am I doing that? Like, am I actually implementing this stuff? Or am I looking at what I already have, instead of reinventing the wheel all of the time and going, oh, hey, yeah, I'm doing that just with different words. Right.
Now,
Because
another
that can be
client of
very
mine,
frustrating.
oh yeah, another client of mine was the exact reverse. He's done a brilliant job of this, and he's created a whole culture around it. Um, and they do, his company, everybody in the company reads a book a month.
Okay.
And at the end of the month, the whole company gets together and they talk about, is there anything in this book that we can apply? They actually make a conscious decision. Sometimes the answer is no. It was
Right.
an interesting book, but there's nothing we need to do to change our business in light of that. And sometimes it's personal growth stuff, and sometimes it's business things. But it's really interesting because they collectively talk about it. And so then there's this collective responsibility to say, okay, if we're saying this is going to make our business better, then let's talk about how we're going to do it. And so it isn't just the owner coming in going, I read a book on the weekend, now we're going to do this.
Guess what? We're changing. But I think that gives buy-in too to those people that are working there, that they actually feel like they have a say, because that's something that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing like almost a culture shift where people are like, I want to feel like I'm, even as an employee, that I'm making a difference,
Oh,
that I'm helping this to grow, that this is my baby too, right?
so much. And in fact, I created a tool. It's a strategic planning tool, and it automates the whole front end of the strategic planning process just by asking a whole bunch of questions. It automatically populates a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then it guides you through the creation of the strategic plan. And I've had a number of clients who I've both helped them build their plan, but also train their second tier of management, like their senior employees in it, and they've helped develop the plan as I train them. And the buy-in, it was interesting. I did it actually initially through a funding model. You had to train staff in order to get this funding model, and so we did it as a way of getting the strategy development worked on through this funding model. But the outcome of it was the team were so, they just owned it so much, and they cared about it, and they started holding the owner accountable to the plan because they'd helped create it.
Right.
And what was so interesting is like how much they didn't know they wanted it, but as soon as they got their teeth into it, they loved it, and they felt like this business is mine now. And that sort of cultural consequence of that level of participation is just transformative.
Well, and I think that it just helps the company. And you talk a lot about like culture and why, what the, how that's so important in businesses. Talk to us a little bit about, that shift that we're starting to see, and, maybe even how businesses need to start paying attention to the culture that they're creating.
Well, right now, I've been started ringing the alarm bell with a lot of people right now about why this is so important. There was a stat that just came out 2 weeks ago. 34% of millennials are planning on switching their jobs, switching companies when the pandemic is over.
Wow.
This is a big deal. I already have clients, particularly those in, with blue collar labor forces, who I just had a client this morning. He's like, my growth plans are on hold because I can't find a foreman, and the difference for small businesses, like, you're not going to be able to compete with Google on salary.
Right.
So, you're going to have to, or the oil companies or you're going to have to build a culture where people want to be. And so just from a competitive advantage standpoint, a culture is absolutely crucial right now for the labor market, because associated with that 34% of people who are going to switch jobs in the States, Goldman Sachs is predicting 8% growth for the US economy just in 2021. In Canada, it's going to be 3.5 to 4.5% just in 2021, with anemic first quarter growth. So that means like the latter half of the year is going to be bonzo. And so we're going to be facing a labor shortage. And so if you don't have a culture that is a competitive advantage, you're going to be in trouble. The second reason why you kind of want culture is, I talk a lot about strategy, but I think, you know, you may have heard that saying, culture eats strategy. And I actually don't buy that. I believe culture and strategy are great bedmates. Like they're wonderful lovers. You know, like strategy sort of says what's to be done, and culture makes sure that it gets done. And when you have both those things in place, you're going to beat the competition, because you're going to be focused on what needs to be done, and you're going to have this group of people who care enough to not only do it, but to do it well. And then that's going to make customer experience better. It's going to make you a better employment brand. It's going to be allow you to be more innovative. Like those two things, I think, are the twin pillars that people need to really focus on coming out of this pandemic. Because there's going to be massive opportunities, but particularly the labor market challenge is going to be real.
Well, and I think, too, like a lot of people, I'm sure, might be sitting there listening going, well, that's great. But, I think I have a really good, culture here at work. Everybody kind of seems happy. So are there some specifics that you can give that people, can look at and say, here's something that you can ask, or here's something that you can look at to really know, what your culture is? Because I think sometimes owners go, I think it's good.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem.
Yeah, until it becomes one. And part of it is around the ownership. And I use the term high performance culture as opposed to nice culture. I had a client who had a lovely culture, like, and it was all her giving, right? So she brought in a personal trainer in the basement, and they had a little gym down there, and she brought in flowers and lunches every Friday, and it was all give, give, give. And this was back a number of years. So then the 2009 financial crisis hit, and people fled like rats off a sinking ship. Like there was no loyalty. And so what she learned, and what a bunch of other clients I've worked with have done, is when there's a reciprocity where there's, yes, we provide for you, but there's also an expectation of performance. You know, that there is accountability within this culture, and we strive for excellence. And then what happens is excellent people like to work with other excellent people. And so the people who are not so excellent kind of find their way out. And so then people want to be part of that on an ongoing basis, right? So your question was, how do you determine whether or not you have that? Part of it is asking people. Like there's tons of tools out there that are employee engagement and culture satisfaction levels. You can actually do that. My definition of a culture, though, which gives you more specific things to look at, is culture is the behavior, the systems, the incentives, and the signals that reveal the values of the organization. And that's such, I can unpack that a little bit if you want, but it's really important to understand that, because so many people say, well, we did our values and they're on the wall and that's our culture.
Yeah.
Well, no, it isn't. Like here, I'll give you two just really classic examples of these. So one client of mine, they did beautiful work on their values, and the ownership was authentically, like, this wasn't window dressing. They were authentically committed to this. But here was the interesting thing. They had high-end services. So they had a salesperson who was responsible for about $8 million in sales a year. So, you know, good chunk of revenue for the firm, but was a disaster culturally. And so then it's like, what do we do? Like, do we fire this person for our culture? But then even members of the team were going, well, you can't fire her. Like, our jobs are dependent on the revenue she's bringing in. So what do we do? And I made this suggestion to them. They fought me on it for a while, and then they wound up doing it. So they wound up spending, I'm going to make up the number, but $40,000 for an executive assistant to put between that person and the internal team. And what it said to the team was, that's the signal part, right? Like, there was nothing formal within the structure about this, but the fact that this person was allowed to mistreat people because she brought in revenue signaled that we in fact care more about money than our values.
Right.
When they invested money to protect the team but preserve the revenue, people went, oh, you're serious about this now, right? And that signaled everyone that, okay, these values are real. You know, and the other story, I had a client that was a construction company, and they had these two values, and they were absolutely committed to them. There was some tragedy within the organization that made it real, that like safety was one of their primary values, and productivity. And I knew the owner well. She was absolutely committed to safety. But here was the problem. Project managers were compensated on hitting production targets. That's the incentive piece. Foremen, the only forms they had to submit every week were on production targets. They didn't have to submit any documentation around safety. So the systems and the incentives ran contrary to their stated values, which led to behaviors that were inconsistent with their stated values. So when you're saying, like, do we have a really great culture? That's kind of a motherhood statement. Like, great culture doesn't mean anything. You got to get specific and say, what values do we want to embrace? And then look and say, are we actually living those? And it means getting pretty specific and detailed about it and being willing to say, not so much. Like values that are lived at 80% are kind of values. And I sort of joke around with clients sometimes, like, do you want to go on the plane with a pilot who lands successfully 99% of the time?
Right. Because that 1%, doesn't seem so big unless you're in it.
Exactly.
So if someone's sitting there and going, okay, like I hear this and I understand this and I want to get to this point, but but where do I start? And I think that there's a lot of people that are out there that are, they get stuck in the minutia of like, I don't even know where to begin for this.
Right.
That's where somebody like you can step in. So tell us a little bit about how you step in, who it is that you, I guess who your ideal client, is to work with and then how you can help.
So ideal client, I work primarily with owner operated. So, well, not operated, owner run businesses between 750 and 10 million in revenue. I've worked with people up to 100 million in revenue, but my sweet spot seems to be in that
in the
750 middle. To 10 million range. I've worked with manufacturing and I've worked with retail. My sweet spot seems to be really around service-based businesses, just who I've got the most experience with. And I do want people who have a values orientation, who care about doing the right thing, who think their business is a way, even if it's just to make their employees' lives better or some part of the community better. Or I had a client, he got into his business because he once hired somebody from that industry, and he said the customer service quality was so terrible it pissed me off, so I started a business to do it better. And he just wants to raise the standards in that industry.
Right.
So however you do it, those are the folks who I love to work with. In terms of how I work, so I've talked about it a few times, but I start at that strategy level because, someone may listen to this and go, oh, I'm going to work on my culture. Well, maybe right now is not the best time to work on your culture. Like if you have a sales problem, if you're not generating revenue, you can spend 3 months working on your culture and then be bankrupt.
Right.
So part of the strategy exercise is to say, where should we start? What should be the focal point right now? And that's a lot of the direction I give people as we do this detailed analysis and then go, okay, I see 3 themes coming out of this. It feels to me like this is the dominant theme. What do you think? And we'll debate it back and forth. And then we'll arrive at a focus and then build a plan to execute. And what that means is the other stuff won't be forgotten. We're just saying that culture thing is critical, but maybe not right now. We're going to do that 4 months from now. And then when we map it out, then everyone knows when we're getting to it. And then the team has a line of sight as well. So they feel like they're in safer hands with the owner. So that's kind of my methodology. And often sales is a big piece that people start with. And in point of fact, on my website now, I shifted. I used to do an ebook on my website, but I now have on my homepage, it's a sales accountability planner that people can just download for free, because I've just found that that's a big sticky point that people have. They want to sell, but they don't actually have methodology, and they don't know how to hold their salespeople accountable, and they don't know how to measure. And so I just created a tool to help them do that. And as you said, if you've been through my website, I build a lot of tools for people just to help in the different circumstances. But that's basically how it works. Start with strategy, get the focal point, and then build a plan to zero in on that. And it usually the starting place is, I'd say 80% of the time, it is either a sales focus or a culture focus.
Well, and I think because sales is such a big thing, right? And people don't think about that. And I think if you want to go into business, you're going into sales. I don't care what you're doing. Yes. But it's really important to learn about sales. And you had mentioned that before, that there's a lot of people who do a lot of research on this, but I find that entrepreneurs tend not to really educated themselves in that, because they go, wow, it's kind of like an icky thing. And it's like, that's the main thing you're doing. Like that's it.
Can I talk about that icky
Yes.
thing idea?
Yes.
Makes me crazy. So sales, I believe, when done well, is one of the most honorable activities you can engage in. And here's why. Sales, when done well and ethically, is professionally helping someone solve a problem. That's all you're doing when you're selling. You're not trying to, quote, land the deal or talk someone into something. You're trying to identify what their problem is and see if you can help them solve it. What could be more honorable than that? Now, if you're a slime ball, like if you're trying to get somebody to buy something that they can't use or that's not going to be good for them, well, yeah, that's terrible. I had a client once. We did a marketing initiative. He wound up getting a whole stack of cards. I came in the next week and said, so how did your follow-up go? And he was like, nah, and he started, making a bunch of excuses.
Right.
And I went, all right, what do you think of salespeople? And he went, oh, I hate them. They're slimy and they're manipulative and they're liars. And I went, right. So how does that help you when you're going to try to follow up? You don't want to be a lying, manipulative so-and-so, which means you're going to try to avoid selling because you don't want to be that person. So instead of trying not to be that person, let's just redefine what we mean by sales. And it was amazing when he took on that sales as professionally helping someone buy or solve problems. And he sold a $120,000 contract a week later. Like it was just a mindset shift.
And I think I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that that's really important for people to get their, to get their mind around and to start rethinking about, and I make the joke a lot. I'm so bad for it. I make the joke of like, we all don't want to be that, Tupperware lady that you're like, oh
right.
God, here comes Bethany. Like, what is she going to try to sell us this time? Right. Like, you're like, no, I don't care what new product. No, I'm not hosting a party. And I'm one of those people, right? Like, I'm like, just give me the catalog and I'll give you money. That's how this relationship is going to work. But, and that, even for myself was a really hard thing for me to get over, because I always had, I had that old thinking in my head of, I don't want people to think that I'm slimy, or, for them to constantly shut the door or roll their eyes when they see that they're coming. But what that did is prevent me from doing anything. And then, later on that person would go, why didn't you ever tell me that you could have helped me with this? And so I realized that by having that mindset, it was actually preventing myself from making money. Which was the whole reason I went into business. So it was sort of that oxymoron thing that I was creating.
And you're not alone. So many have had that. I had a client, I was training her on sales one time, and I said, and remember our sales call? And she went, what sales call? And I said, well, remember when we first met? She goes, that was a sales call? And I said, well, yeah. And she goes, I thought you were just there to help me. And I said, well, I was. And at the end of it, you wanted me to keep helping you. She goes, oh, you.
That's sneaky, right? But it's not. But it's, it's true. We don't think of it that way, right? Like we always think of the sales pitch, that quote unquote stereotypical pitch, which it doesn't have to be like that.
No, and there was some study, and I can't quote it now where it came from, but they were working on the placebo effect. And what they discovered was if the doctor knows that they're handing the sugar pill, the placebo effect is less strong. So somehow the person receiving it picks up the sort of bull beep, message. And so the idea, so if you are selling and trying to get somebody something they don't need, there's even if you're using like the quote sales techniques, there's going to be something in the back of their head that just doesn't feel right. And even if they buy, they're not going to feel good about the buy, and so I think if you're in that state of I'm just going to help someone solve a problem, even if that means, like I've occasionally had people say they wanted to hire me and I've listened to them and I said, no, you need this instead. And they look at me kind of, what? You're
turning down money?
Yeah. And I said, well, you'll come back to me, but right now you need that thing before you need me. And that makes me feel good. And it winds up building my reputation. I mean, I know people I've done that to. They've told other people in their communities that I did that. And it just, I don't know. I just think it winds up, are you in the long haul or the short haul? And if you're in the long haul, when you live by some principles, I think it always serves you better.
And I think that that's a perfect turnaround, because I think, like you said, if you're being ethical about what it is that you're doing and why you're in business, it just helps you, because people naturally come back to you, because they'll know if you can't help them, you're going to help them get to wherever they need to be. And that's important to a lot of people, because then they know you're not just there to pull money out of their wallet. You truly are
Right.
there for the benefit of them, and you'll make a little money on it too.
Yeah.
That's good.
And the interesting thing I think too is when people know that you're there for that purpose, you're actually better at selling because they give you more information.
Right.
Like when I sit down with people, like people tell me their numbers, they tell me the stuff about their families, they tell, like lots of stuff that they don't tell other people. But I think they know that I'm not going to try to use it quote against them in some way. I'm just trying to figure out whether or not I can help them. And if I can't, I'll tell them, I'll say, no, I'm not the right guy for you. But if I can, then I'll be able to say how. And I think anybody in a sales role, if you can do that, if you can authentically, the people are just they're going to tell you the problem so that you're better able to solve it for them.
And I think that that's a key tip too there, that, whatever business that you're in is, know those people that you can't help, that it's okay to say, I'm not the person for you, but hey, this person is.
Yeah.
And that can result in sales down the road. So it's okay to do that.
Oh, for sure. I had a
Yeah.
conversation with a client just this morning, actually. This was on a labor issue, but the analogy I used is, in poker, poker is a game of chance, people think, but it's actually not, right? It's just chance is an element of the game. And a rookie can beat a pro in any given hand, but a pro will always beat the rookie in the game because there's skill involved, right?
Right.
And so the conversation I had with him, he was trying to decide, whether to hire somebody or fire somebody. And he was looking to me for basically to do the risk analysis for him. And I said, well, basically, do you want to win the hand or do you want to win the game? Like, if you win the hand, yeah, don't hire this person, do it all yourself. You'll have higher margins this year, and you'll probably have fewer headaches. That's winning the hand. But you told me your goal is to grow the business, to have multiple crews, and to be making this much money. That'll never be achieved if you win the hand.
Right.
If you want to win the game, you're going to take a little hit on your margins right now, and you're going to build the infrastructure, and you're going to build the business, and then you're going to win the game. And, sales is like that, right? Like saying, oh, I gave up that one sales opportunity. Yeah, but you just built your reputation.
Yeah.
And, over 3 years, you keep building that reputation, you're going to be the pro poker player.
Yeah. I love that. That's a fantastic analogy. So you have on your website a ton of you actually call them cool tools. I was about to say that, really cool tools. And I just looked over and I'm like, that's exactly what they're called. But you have, a business self-analysis tool, and I took it and it was really great, but talk a little bit about what that is for people.
Sure. So it's just a way for someone to do a pretty fast self-diagnostic, but it's not like, Success Magazine, 7 questions to determine your success personality or something like that. It's actually quite detailed, and there's 7 key areas of a business, and it asks you questions on each one of those on a scale of 1 to 10. And then the result is like a spider graph. So you can actually see, okay, the ones that are further out on the graph are stronger, and those that are closer to the middle are weaker. And so that helps you sort of target what you might need to work on. Like I said, too many people do whack-a-mole. So this is like a lighter version of my strategy tool. So the actual strategy tool I use with my clients is much more robust than that.
Right.
But it's a really fast and pretty accurate way of people to go in and do a quick analysis of the business and say, oh, yeah, you know what? My marketing side needs a little bit of work, or, I'm not so strong on building my people. And then you can sort of make some decisions about, okay, given that, or what should I be thinking about in the next 3 months to be a focal point of my business?
Yeah. And I think that's, it was about, I think you were right, accurate. You said it was going to take me about 10 minutes. And I think it was about that when I went through it. But I was really surprised too, because there were some things that I was like, I thought I was going to be stronger in that one, at the end. And I was like, oh, but that, the overview of the graph, I was sort of like, but it makes sense. It is where it is. So there was a lot of things even that I got out of it that I was like, yeah, it's been a while since I looked at that. I got to start dusting some stuff off the
Oh,
shelves.
good.
So where are all the places that people can go to find you, to learn more about you? And then don't forget to give a plug for your new podcast and tell us about what that's going to be like.
Oh, yes. So the best place to find me is just on warrencoghlin.com. That's Coughlin.com. And like you said, there's tools in various places on the site. If you sign up, for instance, for that sales planner, it then takes you to some other ones. I've got 2 ebooks, and then I've got the cool tools, and I've got another couple of tools through that. So play around on there and see what's of value. That's one of the reasons I do that. I just want people kind of to see how I think and what the tools look like, and what it might be like to work with me. And if they like that approach, then that's what it'll be like to work with me. And then, yeah, I am launching my own podcast, and I struggled with this for a long time because it's funny. I'm an actor and a theater director, and I've got, sort of a radio voice. And so people are always encouraging me to do this podcast. And I thought, I'm so busy. But then I have this, I write out a vision statement every day. And my vision statement is to inspire others through entrepreneurial leaders to become models of excellence and of moral congruency and consistency, and thereby embrace their pivotal role in shaping a society that works for all. That's my vision for why I do what I do. And then I realized I'm not really putting that out there enough. I'm helping people, in my clients, but I'm not putting the message out there well enough. So I bit the bullet, and I'm starting a podcast, and it's going to be called The Business That Matters Spotlight. And it's not going to be about me or my philosophy or anything like that. It's going to be profiling entrepreneurs who either are making or are striving to make a positive difference while growing a successful business. And it's meant to be both learning lessons about how these people have done it, but also hopefully be inspiring and, set up role models like, geez, that gives me permission to do that. I can inject values into my business. I'm a mentor at a feminist incubator in Toronto. And, there's a lot of conversation in that group about how feminist values are in fact humanist values and how they get integrated into the business. And so I just want to have lots of conversations about that stuff, like how we started off, how you can receive more value by providing more value by doing good in the world. And that's sort of kind of what the podcast is going to be about. It'll be the Business That Matters Spotlight. I'm hoping to launch it. It's either going to be end of May or beginning of June.
Well, I'm excited to definitely tune into that and get some inspiration, because I think it's important for us to, reach out and to find those people that inspire us. But it's also important, and I think some people forget, that when you get to that point is to remember there are people that are where you were a couple of years ago that want to hear from you and go, hey man, I've been there and I did it. And this is how I climbed up the ladder. You can too, because I think we all need that, continuous of, well, I mean, come on. Susie did it.
Yeah. And because as an entrepreneur, it can be very lonely and isolating. If you don't know other entrepreneurs, your friends who work in the corporate world, they don't get it. Your spouse and kids, they don't really understand the pressures. And so to have others who walk the path before you or alongside you can really be encouraging.
Well, thank you so much for all of the tips and advice that, you gave today. And, your website does have a lot of really great tools. I'm not even through them all. So I do encourage people to go out there. We'll make sure we have all of the links where people can find Warren and everything that he does on our blog post. And so if you could have one, we were talking about not reading too much, but tell me what the last book was that you read that you were like, this is a good one. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh my God. I'm rapidly trying to look around my office. So it's gonna be weird because it won't be one that maybe entrepreneurs will naturally resonate with. It's a book called Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, and it is written. I've forgotten the author's name. She started a whole association and organization. She does slow investment money in do-good companies in developing countries. And the stories in that book will inspire you. Like they are, like it just fills your heart, kind of. And she's super smart. Like she's a pro-market, pro-business investor, but invests slow money for businesses that do social transformation. And so it's just like how we started off. It's just a book that I found really motivating.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. We'll make sure that we have a link where people can find that book too. Because I always like to know what people are reading. Like what's inspiring you? What gets your juices going?
Yeah, though I've got about 4 on the go, and that's why I sort of stalled for a second. But that
Yeah.
was yeah.
That's what happens with readers. They're like, I don't know which one, because I'm the same way. I read multiple books at the same time, which drives my husband crazy because he's like, how do you know? And I'm like, I don't know. They're all business books. They're easy for me to keep track of.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just put one in each room, and wherever I sit, I'm like, oh yeah, let's get back to this one. Well, thank you again, Warren. It's been an absolute pleasure to get
Thank
to
you.
know you. And
You too. It was a real pleasure. I enjoyed it. You're a lovely host. You're very engaging.
oh, well, thank you. So much good stuff in this episode. I really love what Warren said about education without application is just trivia. And I think especially in this last year when, we found ourselves maybe with a little bit of extra time and taking all of these courses and extra things that, we really need to start concentrating on that application component and really thinking about, the values that you have, the values that you had when you were thinking about starting this business, and are you making them a priority? Because really, we started businesses because we wanted to make a positive difference. And of course, grow a successful business and make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I love that one of Warren's values is that you can do that. You can make positive impacts on, customers and your team and the larger community, all while building attractive profits and creating a fulfilling lifestyle without feeling like you're doing something wrong. And I really do encourage you to head to his website. There are so many incredible tools on that as well. Check out his courses. They start at $77 and, everything from sales momentum and top right living and the scorekeeper system. And then as well, check out his free resources, especially the sales accountability planner. It's a really simple tool to plan your sales activities, how to monitor performance. And I think a lot of you could really benefit from that. So make sure that you did what I did and really, snoop through his website, because there is a lot of really great, courses and free resources and cool tools there as well. If you like putting a face to the name, you can always head to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification buttons. We're also going to be having some extra videos that are only going to be showing up there. So you're going to want to make sure that you tune in now, because those are going to be coming out in the next month. So we're really excited about that. And of course, we always love connecting with you. So you can find us on all of our social media channels or email us. I love hearing your thoughts, your questions, and as well, if you know somebody that you think has a really interesting story, or if that person is you, we are always looking for guests. So you can always email us or DM us and let us know. So no matter what you're doing today, make sure you carve a piece out to have fun. Because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?